Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic in this passage where it seems like there are there are conditions. It almost seems like there's conditions. It's like, okay, you made it this far, but I got one last test to see if you really are with me. Um, and I think there's something in God's just sovereignty in this text. And it's almost as if there's those last few, and I'll hit on this a little bit, but those last few verses, it's almost like God is just reminding him. You got to ask, like, is this for God? Is some of these things at the end that he's saying, is it really for God? So does God really not know what Abraham is going to do? Or does he, at the end, what does he say at the end when he's talking to Abraham? He says, now I know that you fear me. Did he not think that? Or is it for the benefit of Abraham that he says these things? I'll talk about that a little later, but that's a really good observation. Who else? Right here in the front.
Yeah, I want to know, like, what's up with his son. Like, if that was me, like, you know, like, he had kind of sound like a big boy. He's carrying wood up this mountain.
Good, that's good.
And then, like, the next thing that the verse says is, like, oh, yeah, Abraham found his son. And then the next thing is, like, oh, a ram came. So, like, was his son like, oh, it's cool, Dad. Like, you have the ram now, like, even though it's just tied up. Like, what's happening there?
Isaac is strong. Isaac can like carry wood up the mountain, and then I'm just wondering. I actually wonder why Isaac didn't ask that question earlier. I know we setting out to go on a 3 days journey, and I'm like, wait a minute, supposed to be some lamb chops around here or something. But as they go on, then it's like getting tense. He's like, where is the sacrifice? It doesn't say much about Isaac, and a lot of folk have said something about the silence of Isaac and it representing something about his faith. I actually think when I read this, the more I read it, the more I realize that in the writing, it leaves a lot of things out because those things are not the main focus necessarily. It's a lot being said about God, who he is, and kind of what he expects of us in this passage. But that's something that I've been trying to think, and to be true to the passage, I can't give you something definitive. Just know that dude's just quiet, just like his God would provide. I'm thinking, because we can read this passage, I'm thinking, come on, give me some more. I need to know exactly what do you mean he's gonna provide? But that's a good observation. Yeah, he's just silent. What else? Right here.
Yeah, where's Sarah in all this? Don't you think Sarah?
Where's the wife? Did Abraham share with his wife? Is this passage telling us the really hard things? We ain't got to tell our wives. We just do it. No, that's bad. That's bad Bible study. I don't know where Sarah at. She back at home, chilling. Maybe she don't know what's about to happen. But it doesn't necessarily say. I can't answer that with some kind of deep meaning. But yeah, that's troubling. That's something that I would react to. Oh, she thought. So she thought about it. The man didn't think about it. Okay, I got it. Okay, are we going back here? Back here? One, go ahead. Okay. That's actually a really good observation, because you got to realize that child sacrifice was actually normal, or at least people did it in this time. It wasn't something that was out of the ordinary for a people's God to ask them to sacrifice a child. Often people would do that to promote fertility. It was a way to ask the gods to give us fertility for all the people. We'll sacrifice one for the fertility of all the people. So it's almost as if, and one key thing about this is that this is not a worldly thing. Isaac is a blessing to Abraham, and God is telling him to give it up. So yeah, God asks us for a lot of things, but this is actually a blessing to Abraham, and he's asked to give it up. So God's kind of messing with him. Stacy, I'm going to swoop back over here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. If anything, by the end, Abraham knows, like, oh, this is not a God who sacrificed his children. And it is just something that it is. So we talked about the silence of Isaac, but some of the things that Abraham says hints at something that's going on with Abraham. Where he said, he looks at the servant and says, we'll be back. He looks at him at the foot of the mountain and says, hey, we'll be back. And then he goes up. So it is something about Abraham's faith. I want to hit on that. I'm gonna do one here and then I'm gonna come back here because I saw a hand. Go ahead. Yeah. And I kind of want us to look at this, kind of enter into this passage with that heart, because this is a challenge to us. And I want us to maybe enter into this passage with that heart as as an activist community who have made a lot of sacrifices. To look at this story, it's even more challenging. And what you said, like how Abraham could have felt about, he's been following God for a long time, and now God is asking him this thing. And it's almost like a place where a crisis of faith could happen. I want us to look at this passage with those eyes. One more. Go ahead.
It was pointed out that you mentioned how it was really interesting how Abraham is taking up Isaac and doing so like he's in front of his servants.
Yeah.
Servants who he takes up with him. And it's really interesting how he tells them that we will be right back.
Yeah.
And I almost wonder, like, is it out of, what is the intention as to, like, why he's telling them that? Is it more so to cover up? Is it like I don't want them to know that I'm going to kill my son? Or is it like he's understanding of,
Yeah.
God will provide? Because, in verse 4, it says that he even tells his son, God will provide.
Yeah.
And then in verse, I think it's later on, or it's verse 7 and then verse 14, it says that he names the mountain.
Yeah.
So it's like this constant, like, just foreshadowing or something. It's not going to be that.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. You raise a good point. What if he had told his servants, I'm going to be back, but this dude, sorry. Yeah, I don't want to tip him off, but he might not be following behind me. I want to look at this passage and just really bring out a few things. When I look at this, I thought of the word terrific. If you look up the definition for the word terrific, there's actually two definitions. One definition is something that we are familiar with. It's to describe something that's extraordinarily great. But a second definition of terrific, and lesser known, lesser used definition for terrific is this idea of something extraordinarily troubling, something extraordinarily disturbing. And an example of that is, sometimes the word terrific, you can use it to describe something, and it carries these two definitions at the same time. So if I was to say somebody was going at a terrific speed, depending on where you're at, whether you're in the car or whether you're just kind of outside admiring it, terrific speed means amazing, great. If you're in the car, you're like, it's horrible. It's a horrible speed to go at. And I think this is kind of who God is. This is the God that Abraham is encountering. It's a terrific God. Somebody said it. God has done so much in Abraham's life, and he speaks to Abraham. But then there's also this troubling request that God has made. And I don't always like to face this part of God, the God who kind of goes against my expectations. especially the expectations that are linked to his promises in my life, linked to his blessings in my life. And this is the big troubling dilemma in this passage, is that God has promised Abraham something, and now his command is in conflict with his promise. And I think we have to wrestle with this. We have to wrestle with what happens when God's promises to us conflicts with some of the things he leads us into. When God's promise to never leave you nor forsake you contrasts with the fact that as you follow God, you experience loneliness. What happens when God's promises to comfort us conflicts with the fact that he asks you to start a ministry that stresses you the heck out. We got to wrestle with what happens when God asks something of us or leads us into a place that directly contradicts his promise. Because I think that is a terrifying place to be. And I believe we find both resolution and challenge in as Abraham responds to this. So I want to look at these three responses that Abraham gives in this passage. I want to first look at verses 1 through 3, where we see that Abraham just responds to God. God gives him a hard command, and Abraham just obeys him. I want to look at verses 7 through 8, where Isaac asks Abraham, where is that lamb that we're supposed to have as we go up this mountain? And Abraham responds, God will provide the lamb. I think there's something deep in that. And the third response is verses 11 through 13. This is Abraham's second response to God as God provides a lamb. So let's start with response 1. God calls Abraham. He says, Abraham. Abraham says, here I be. God says, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and sacrifice him. God is commanding Abraham to give him Isaac's life back. This is terrifying. And y'all, all of Abraham's life has led up to this moment. This is a crucial moment. He has followed God. He couldn't have a kid. He was old and he couldn't have a kid, and God promised him that he would. And then years later, God actually gives him a kid, and now Abraham has proof that God will actually make him into a nation. That was the original blessing, that I will make you to a nation, you will be blessed to the people. And so Isaac is proof, and he is the practical way that God will be making a nation through Abraham. And now in this moment, God is saying, I take it back. Is this not horrible? This is a crappy place to be for Abraham. But as we find Abraham in this dreadful place, this passage makes us stand toe-to-toe with the dreadful thought that God could on one hand give a blessed gift, and on the other hand take it away. He could give you a flourishing microchurch. He could give you a healthy network of microchurches. He could give us a community of friends who we love like family. God could give this to us in one moment and then choose in the name of a test, to take it away. And not only take it away, but call us to be the ones who pull the plug on it and watch it fade. There's a saying that I always grew up with. The old folk would always say, they'll say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. That's a horrible thing to say to a little kid. Horrible thing to a little kid. I remember hearing that, I'm like, my Legos, my Hot Wheels. My mama, I used to love spaghetti. I still do, but when I was young, it was extra special love. And you get a plate of spaghetti, like, God could take my spaghetti away. Have you ever had somebody give you something and then constantly ask for it back? Have you ever had that happen? Ever had somebody give you some clothes and then constantly like, hey, can I borrow that? Can I borrow those? Like, it's almost like it's still there. This happens most often with food for me. With food, somebody buy you some food and then they just snacking off of it. They just snacking it as if it's theirs. This happens with me and Stefania all the time. Me and my wife Stefania. We're about, I want to get you something, and get some food, and then just snacking off of it. And I've done something where I'm like, bought her some kind of cold drink just out of the blue. Nothing special, just like, I'm going to get you a drink. And it's like, hey, here you go, and she got it. And then before you know it, I done drunk half of it. And she's like, Brad, what's up? I thought that was mine. The thing is, that is messed up. And for a moment, when me and Stefania in those moments, that person seems like the worst person ever because they took what you gave to me. You said it was mine, and then you took it. I imagine this is this situation with Abraham, but on a way deeper, more serious level. Isaac was Abraham's. Now God is asking for him back. That's messed up. That's terrible. But I think the biggest contrast to maybe the terror that we feel as we respond to this passage, the biggest contrast to that is Abraham himself. We have to isolate this and really see this. Abraham doesn't know the rest of the story. We know the rest of the story, but Abraham does not know the rest of this story. He does not know of a ram in the bush. He does not know God speaking to him again. All he has is this one command and this promise that he knows God has given him. And he's heard God clearly. So when you hear me say hearing God, it's based on the fact that he has heard God clearly tell him to do something that challenges God's promise. And he just obeys him. And isn't one of the questions that you want to ask in this moment is why? Would anybody ask why in this moment? For me, that's the missing thing is, why, God? That's cool, but why? This is a question that we usually ask when we jump into a terrible situation. We look at God, or we look at the situation and we say, why? The last time I was on a roller coaster that I can remember was with Jeremy Stevens. Jeremy had some free passes to Busch Gardens, and he invited me to go with him. Bad idea, number one. Go with Jeremy to Busch Gardens during a time where nobody was there. So we went at a time that was like low tourist season or whatever. It's like nobody there. So we could go on rides all the time, just open. We could just go around. Bad idea to go with Jeremy because Jeremy's crazy. He wanted to go on everything a couple of times because we could literally go on a ride, come off, walk back around, just get back on it and go again. So we on what is the name of that Busch Gardens roller coaster? The one that goes way up and then it's like a Shikra. Oh my gosh. That thing, Shikra will make you, yeah. So we get on this roller coaster, and you know how it goes with roller coasters. You get on, you're like, yes, I'm on a roller coaster. We finna do this. And I'm psyching myself up on the inside. I'm not saying on the outside. I'm just like psyching myself up. We about to get on a roller coaster. I'm ready for this. It's a good decision. This is going to be fun. And then as it starts going up, somewhere in the middle of it going up, I'm like questioning my decision, like, okay, I'm still a man, I think. Still a man. I'm ready for this. Now, the problem with that dang Shikra is that you go up, it gets you to the top, and then you can see like all of Tampa and St. Pete and maybe to Bradenton, and you just like, you can't fake it no more. You like smiling, but you like shaking. And then that thing gets you out there, and then it goes and says, click. It puts you over, we decided the first time to go on the front, and so it goes, click, you like this. And so I'm like, and you tighten that thing, so you can't like move, so you scared, but I'm like, click, and I'm like, oh gosh. And it was terrifying, y'all. And then what happened was that there were some wasps up there with us. So wasps start flying, and I'm just like, oh gosh, and I can't move. I can't touch my head, so I'm doing all this. So yeah, it was terrifying. It was when I got up there and it clicked and the wasp flying, I'm just like, why did I do this? Why did I jump on this thing with this crazy white man? And I'm trying to. Terrible idea. And I asked myself, why the heck did I do it? And I'm so stupid, it got over. And I was like, whoo, let's do it again. We went and did it again. That's funny, but in terrible situations, truly terrible situations, when somebody dies in our life or when we lose something close, dear to us, we ask ourselves why. And y'all, our whys are usually a way of saying this was a mistake. Is there another way? It is a cry for another way. Is our way of saying, I don't believe this is the right way to go about this. And on our best days, I think our whys When we ask our whys on our best days, it is a want for more information, more reassurance, more safety before we go. But we see a different response from Abraham and in his obedience. And there's something about Abraham, something about his faith that is gotten to a place where he does not necessarily ask why. Abraham shows us that we have to believe what the prophet Isaiah says when he says, God's thoughts are not our thoughts, neither are our ways his ways. Abraham showed us that we need to really believe that. You see, the question is, does God have a right to mess with you? Does he need permission to mess with you? Does he need to give explanation? How great do we think God is? Can God take our microchurches, destroy them, move them, shrink them, shift their focus? Can he have his way in even our microchurches with minimum explanation? It makes me wonder if an angel descended through this roof into this meeting right now, and that's how angels travel to me. They come through stuff down from heaven. And if an angel said, look, I'm from God, y'all need to stop this whole underground thing, I wonder how many of us would stand there and be like, what you talking about? An angel could visit us. I feel like we would question him. But the truth is, God is like the sun, y'all. We look at the sun, and we enjoy the sunset and the sunrise. We write poems about its majesty. We even make little sayings about the sun. We say there's nothing new under the sun. We say the sun can rise and fall on somebody. We can say people can get hit where the sun don't shine. And ironically, you can be someone's sunshine. I feel like we have all these different ways that we romanticize the sun, but the truth is, y'all, the sun will eat you up. Truth is that the sun is 109 times hotter than 109 times the size of the earth and burns at 27 million degrees. If you took every piece of matter in our solar system and put it together and weighed it, the sun would account for 99% of the weight. In the best spacesuit, you couldn't get within 3 million miles of the sun without dying. The sun is a big ball of death, a destroyer of worlds if they come too close to it. This is who God is. This is the God who Abraham is responding to. This is who God is. He is one who is greater than the sun. This is the one who Abraham obeys. This is the God that Abraham has come to know. And these first 3 verses are like pressing our noses against the sun, where we realize that God is bigger than us, that he is dreadfully great. And God is so great that he can mess with us. He can mess with his promises and expect obedience because he is God and everything is his, and he is great enough to do that. And I think this one fact that Abraham has to deal with, this one fact that he has to deal with in these first 3 passages, that God is great, and I have to obey him. I think this is terrifying. But luckily, that's not the end of it. If we look at response number 2, where Abraham is in dialogue with his son, with Isaac, I feel like this response gives us the first evidence of Abraham's internal state, what he's thinking. Isaac, rightfully so, we talked about it. He asked about, where's the lamb? And we talked about how Abraham talks to his servants before he goes up the mountain. And to Isaac, he says, God will provide. To his servants, he says, we'll be back. I believe this is what we take from Abraham's response to Isaac, that God can provide. Simply that God can provide. I feel like Abraham can respond to God because he knows God to be a provider. So even though it doesn't make sense to him, one, he knows God is great, better, bigger than him. And on the other hand, he knows that God has always been a provider and that he will continue to be a provider. I mean, y'all, the request that God is making is coming from the creator of all that is living, the one who gave life to a dead womb. He can certainly produce life in this situation. The request is coming from the one who miraculously gave Abraham Isaac. Surely he can provide in this situation. But in analyzing Abraham's response deeper, if we take it a little bit deeper, and we see that Abraham cherishes his only child, that Abraham loves his son, and this is what God emphasizes. It says, Abraham, your son, the one you love. He can't get it mixed up. He can't say, oh man, I need to find Ishmael real quick so that I can take him. No, God spells it out for him. The one that you love, your only son. Get him and sacrifice him. And I think in Abraham's response to his son, to his servants, this idea that he knows God can provide, I think what we see is that Abraham's faith is not rooted in the blessings of God. His faith is rooted in God himself. And this is one of the greatest threats to us as we follow God with our whole lives. We can sometimes bank our faith on the miracles of God or great moments of God instead of God himself. This was me when I was in college, in my early, younger disciple days, my knucklehead days. I was kind of fresh out of church and on campus, and InterVarsity had these conferences, and the conferences that InterVarsity had was pretty good. And I loved it because it was the one place that they mixed up the music, where I had the chance to kind of see people that looked like me, more people. It was a chance for me to kind of get plugged into this and see the greater movement of InterVarsity. And I loved it. And then I remember my first summers leaving with this kind of like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that this would happen when the people of God got together. And it was this spiritual high that I was on. It took me losing one staff worker to challenge that notion. It's Jason Thompson, who is now an underground missionary in Germany. He was my first staff worker within InterVarsity. And I was about 2 years into to being part of InterVarsity on campus, and he said, I'm leaving. And there was some kind of internal struggle that happened then, where I wanted, if I had to name it, what I wanted to do, I wanted to stop. I wanted to quit. I had built a lot of trust with him. He had poured into me. I knew him personally, and I think when he said I'm leaving, it was just, I felt betrayed. And he explained everything that God was calling him to and what God was doing and how it was good for the movement. But I remember feeling like, man, this sucks. In that ordeal, I recognized that I had put my faith in these activities. I had even put my faith in Jason. My faith was strongly, maybe a little too strongly tied to this person. And I had to deal with that. And it was a gift to me because me and Jason have a joke now. Wherever I go, he leaves. So I decided to get more involved in InterVarsity. He was like, I'm out. Then I came on staff with InterVarsity. He was like, I'm out. And then, a few years later, I was like, man, I started getting more involved with the underground and was kind of in this thing. And Jason was like, I'm going to another country. So the joke is that now, should I move to Germany, he's going to move into space. That's it. That's the only place left. But y'all, I had put my faith in a person. It was, I don't know if I put it directly in him, but a big chunk of it was faith in this person, in this thing, in this InterVarsity ministry and the conferences. I think God demands our whole life, all of us, every single part of your life. And this passage is a plea for us to have a faith that is bigger, that is stronger than a moment or a single blessing. This is Abraham not even putting his faith in his only son, but instead saying, I believe and I have my faith in this God. And if he's asking for my son, then I have to follow him. My sister-in-law, Tama, I think her chief goal is to find her way somehow into my talks. So it's like we go deep when I have to speak. She knew when I speak, she has a deep moment with me. But this has just been the trend for our life. We always have these deep moments together. And so some of y'all know Tom. I remember taking her on a date one time. So she just came here and she was having, trouble with dudes. And so I remember just taking her on a date just to say, man, let me show you what a date is. And I remember having a deep conversation with her and just having talks about what it meant to be pursued. And these are some of the deep moments that we've had. Well, since Thomas has been here, and even after that time, she just, her life's been in sort of a turmoil. And she's searching, been searching for herself. And after a life that has included a lot of abuse and drugs, she entered into Created's ministry. And her life has taken a serious turn now. And last night we were at the table, and of course, a deep moment, and we started talking. I just had to ask her one thing. I had to ask her, you know what? Since, what's different now? I could see that she had started taking her faith a little bit more seriously, and her life was she was making big changes in her life. So I said, what is the biggest difference in your walk with God now than before you started ministry with Created? And she told me that before, if she saw Stefania doing a quiet time, she would do a quiet time. Before, she felt like there was a certain time, a certain setup, a certain space she had to be in order to experience God. But she said, now I trust God more. She said, now I can't just lie now. Because now if I lie, it's not just, because of it's the wrong Christian thing to do. She said, now if I lie, it sucks because of what God has done for me. She said, my quiet times are different now. Then she got really honest. She said, I haven't figured out exactly who I am yet. But God is everything to me now. Y'all, God's call is to trust Him, to put our faith in Him. God's call does come with miracles and unexpected blessings and unbelievable spiritual highs from experiencing God in real ways. But those are not what we put our faith in. In fact, they should lead us to God. They point us to God. We cannot be those who live from conference to conference, or from counseling session to counseling session, or worship set to worship set, or meeting to meeting, or even crucible to crucible. Crucible, this gathering, is a place for those who are faithful, those who are full of faith. Now, I'm not saying that you have to come in with just junk together. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to need a space to be healed, to have your wounds healed and taken care of. This is a place for that, for the joy of your salvation to be restored. But we cannot put our trust in this place. Our trust has to be completely given to the God who fills this place. The one who holds all miracles in His being. He requires that our full faith and trust be given to Him. And let's just be real honest for a second. A faith that requires a miracle after miracle is a weak faith. It is a counterfeit faith. It makes God to be something like a magician, where He needs to do a trick for us in order for us to still be interested in Him. And Jesus was all too familiar with this type of faith. When the Pharisees and Sadducees wanted to test Jesus, they asked Him to show a sign from heaven. In response to that, Jesus called them a wicked and adulterous generation. And He refused to give them a sign. I believe God wants us to marvel at His works, to accept His gifts and His miraculous acts with gratefulness. But He does not want us to pledge allegiance to them. Does not want us to pledge allegiance to His blessings. He wants His good works to lead us to a deep and intimate relationship with Him. And I believe this type of intimacy in the midst of God's terrifying test is the only path to God's care, His ultimate care, His providence, which is what I see in Abraham's last response. Abraham's response to Isaac, we just looked at, hints at the belief that God will ultimately provide. But Abraham does not know how God will provide. He just knows that he can. Abraham has an incomplete understanding of God's providence. So in response 3, we see that Abraham, in this scene, is a bit more intense. It's a bit more intense in this scene where Isaac is seconds away from death. And let's even put ourselves in this part of the passage again and make this human for Abraham. Let's dig deep into this and realize that, can you imagine what it would be like to have somebody close to you on the brink of death where you are about to take their life? And can you imagine the relief that Abraham must feel as God calls him to not do that? Me and my brothers used to climb trees. And so we would often try to just climb the tallest tree in our yard, just because it was fun, partially because we were kind of idiots, but we would climb trees. And I remember one time I climbed to the top of a tree, and it was like majestic, because you got to the top, you get up there, and you can see things that you never seen. And I remember being at the top of a tree, and usually we climb with a group. You go as a group. Let me give you Going Through the Bushes 101 by Country Brad. So when you go into bushes, you need to go as a group, because the person in the front is going to show you all the places that you shouldn't step. So they're going to be the ones that just going to be, almost falling out the tree or running into stuff that they shouldn't be running into. And then everybody else, they can take the safe route. This time I went up in the tree by myself. Awesome. I remember getting to the top and being like, wow, I did this myself. And then what you don't want to happen happened. A branch snapped under my foot. A branch snapped, and I remember free falling, back first, out of a tree. And I was just like, I just remember, it's funny, you can remember those moments. You remember what went through your head. I just remember, I'm an idiot, it's coming, just brace yourself, and I might die. I remember feeling that feeling. And then what happened was I was falling, and then halfway down, a single branch caught me. A single branch. I'm not kidding. I landed, and I was like seesawing on a single branch. And there's this moment of just like, what the fuck? You speak that weird gibberish when something like that happens. What's that? And then I grabbed it, and I got out. And y'all, I said, I don't remember necessarily knowing completely, but I said Psalms 23 all the way down the tree. I just kept repeating it. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And I just kept going down the tree. And it felt like I had actually fallen and floated, like I flew. That's the feeling I had. Like it was as if I had already hit the ground and I flew. Like that's what it felt like. That much gratefulness. And I feel like this is where Abraham is, if we could put ourselves in Abraham's shoes, where Abraham is just like, I'm about to kill my son, and then God stops him. And it's almost as if Abraham has already killed his son. This is the feeling I get when I read this passage. It's almost as if when God saves Abraham's son, that's exactly what it feels like. That my son has been given to me from death. And y'all, in this, Abraham learns something. He learns not only will or can God provide, but he learns that God will provide. That God will provide. God shows Abraham that not even God himself will forsake his promise. This is what Abraham is learning. This is the fruit of that moment. That now Abraham knows that not even God himself will forsake his promise. And isn't this the turmoil that we go through? That if God calls us to do something that goes against his promises, what the heck? What is this God I'm serving? But now God shows Abraham, I will not forsake my promise. And when you know that, when Abraham knows that, what else what else does he have to fear? Because he knows God will provide. Not only can he, but he will provide. And then he says, now I know that you fear me. And for us, we got to ask ourselves, is that something for Abraham? Was it something for us? Was it something for God? Was it something to teach Abraham and us? God teaches Abraham that he will not fail him. I believe he says now I know that you fear me. And I think that's completely for Abraham. So that this is what fearing God looks like. And for us, this is what it teaches us, that this is what fearing God looks like, to go into the terror of following God. And walk through that terror. Depend on the provision of God. And then to see him meet us on the other side. I feel like this is providence. On the worship team, come up. This is the mystery that is being unraveled in this passage. That mature belief causes us to encounter a terrific God who invokes terror, real terror, stability, robbing terror. But this terror always leads us to God's providence, his eternal care. Y'all, what has God asked you personally that terrifies you? What has he asked you that terrifies you? What is the risk that God is asking you to make that scares you because it takes away what you have held on to for so long? Is it a call to sobriety? It is a request to walk along someone difficult to love. It is a request to submit to somebody's leadership. It's a request to stick with their ministry or to start a ministry. It's a request to bring a certain word to your family, or maybe to reveal a deep secret to somebody you trust. Y'all, it could be a call to move to a different county, a different state, even a different country for the sake of the gospel. And on the flip side, it could be a dream that he's asking you to let go of. What is that thing that God has asked you that terrifies you? Often it's just a simple request to let go and trust God. I believe this is what it means to follow God. I believe this whole story is an outline of what it means to believe and follow God. Life is often a series of tests when you follow God that will require resolute obedience and a faith that is rooted in God only. And on the other side of this, on the other side of God's test is his providence. But you can't get there without giving him everything. In his book, Getting Honest with God, Mark Littleton writes about his last 2 years of college, in which he developed a powerful interest in poetry. He spent hours a day crafting poems, he said. And like an artist designs a monument, he crafted these poems. And his fascination was at a peak the summer after his graduation from college. And this is when he became a Christian. And when he became a Christian, he didn't stop writing poetry. He kept on writing poetry. He said he spent hours a day writing all kinds of wild and wonderful poems about everything from cockroaches to the majesty of the universe. But amongst a vast world of things to write about, he said he couldn't quite write about 3 things: God, Jesus, and his experiences as a Christian. And then one night, he felt the Spirit of God tell him to give it up, to give up his poetry. And then, maybe even more scared than that, the notion that he needed to burn up everything, all of his poetry, began to fill him. And he says he battled for several days trying to bargain with God. You know how we do. God, I hear you, but come on, if I just, give all of who I am, I'll write 1,000 poems about who you are and your glory. Burn it! That's what he finally heard. He said he heard that word, burn it, with such finality that it was like a death knell. And after all his arguments with God, he finally gathered up all of his pages and with a heavy heart marched to a fireplace. And within only minutes, his materials were given to the flames and burned. And of course, his friends was like, "What the heck is wrong with you? What are you doing?" And after doing it, he says he was sad, but strangely energized. Sad because it was his work, but energized because he felt like he did what the Lord was calling him to do. But then he said it only took a week before he became angry. It took him a week before he started questioning God. A week before he was just like, "What the heck did God make me do? Why did I do that?" He became deeply regretful for what he did. He said he felt like he had destroyed his dream and that God made him do it. And while he worried about all this, he felt God was mean and cruel, a legalistic potentate, he said. But occasionally he would hear God say strange things like, "Do you really think I meant that? Do you really believe this is the way it is? How can you be mad at me with all the other blessings you have?" But he would just push some of these questions out of his head, and he grumbled for weeks. But it was somewhere in those weeks that he began to realize that poetry had a place in his life. It was a gift. It was a blessing. But somewhere in that, it became his God. Poetry was the Lord of his schedule and the Lord of his affections. And when he realized that, it was in that moment, at that point, that God said to him, "Now you're ready. Now you're ready." Astonished, he questioned God and said, "You want me to write? You want me to write?" He felt God say, "I gave you the talent. Don't you think I would ask you to write?" To which he responded to God, "But you made me burn everything. It's all gone. You made me burn it." He said he felt God give him this reply, "And now I am giving it all back. All of the poetry is still in your head and your heart. You just needed a little correction. That's all." And Littleton describes his time after this writing poetry as some of the freest moments of his life. He found that desire was still there and that he could write more freely, more creatively now. And y'all, this is what obedience to God is. This is what being in relationship with a terrific God is. It commands us to go into places that terrify us in order to produce a poetic beauty in our lives, a heavenly providence. There is no other way to this place. You must walk through the terror. You must stand at the edge of that cliff and leap, believing that even if you don't fly, God will prevail. Isaac is a symbol of God's promise, a symbol of hope. He is evidence of God's providence in Abraham's life. Isaac is the reason Abraham has left in this promise that God would make Abraham into a nation. Isaac is where the past and the future of Abraham's life comes together. Isaac is the fulfillment of past promises and a hope for the future fulfilling of God's promise. This is what Abraham was living for. Isaac is representative of all of who Abraham is. And God requires him to give it up, to give up all that he lives for. This wasn't just a child sacrifice going up the mountain. All of who Abraham was walks up that mountain with him. And y'all, there is another who would come after Isaac. Another living sacrifice. But this sacrificial lamb was not just a symbol of hope for Israel, but of hope for all the world. And his father walked with him up the hill to be sacrificed. And this sacrificial son also questioned his father. And though it pained his father knew that this time there would be no other lamb in the bush. This son, this only begotten son of God the Father, was the ram in the bush. And this son would not be saved from the knife. In fact, he would not have the mercy of a single fatal blow of a knife. This son would suffer under the torture of a whip, the pain of a thorned crown, and the utter agony of being nailed to a cross where he would die for us. In Jesus, the fullness of God was sacrificed so that the world could experience the providence of God. And yes, Jesus did get up. And we do have access to God. And having conquered death and hopelessness, God gives us access to his eternal providence. And the way to this is our deaths to ourselves. It is the death to our dreams, to our hopes, our security, our expected futures. Langston Hughes writes this poem. He says, "Bring me all of your dreams, you dreamers. Bring me all of your heart's melodies that I may wrap them in a blue cloud cloth away from the too rough fingers of the world." Y'all, out of love, God asked for us. Out of love, God asked for us to give everything to him. Because he knows that there's a providence that we will not experience. A life that would not be full unless we give all of who we are to him. He knows that in the world we will die. This is the ultimate call of the believer, to take all of who we are up the mountain, to be sacrificed, to lay down all things for the sake of knowing God and his call on our life. It's the only way to him. Will you give him everything this morning? Will you give it all away today with minimum explanation, just knowing that he's a good God? For some of us, that is making Jesus Lord this morning. That is to say, God, I am at the terrible place of the cliff of my life. And to jump means that you are the only one who can grab me. And it means that I'm jumping away from all that I know. And God is saying, jump, jump. It's terrifying, but jump. And I've made this jump, and I know that there is an embrace waiting for you. As we make our way to the table this morning, for you who need to make that jump for the first time, that is what the table is for. For those of us who call ourselves activists, those who call ourselves microchurch leaders and elders, what is it that God needs for you to take up the mountain? What do you need to give him? What is that big decision that you've just been holding back? God has clearly called you, spoke it to you, but you need to give it to him. This morning is a time for you to take it up the mountain, to trust in God in this way. The table is set for you. And we know on that day, when Jesus knew that his time had come to go up his mountain for us, believing fully in his Father's promise with his disciples, who he also wanted to experience the fullness of who God is. Oh God, he took wine, he took bread, said, "This is my body broken for you. This is my body on the mountain broken for you." Take it. And as often as you eat this meal, take it in remembrance of me. And he broke it. And after they had eaten, did the same with the cup. "This is my blood poured out as a new covenant." And not so many words saying, "I am the Lamb who has been broken for you. This is a new covenant in my blood. Take it and drink it in remembrance of me." Y'all, can this be a time of remembrance, but also a time of leaping for us? When you are ready, to give to God what is His, to trust in His security, His providence, the body and blood of Jesus given to you.